All right, well, we'll get this show on the road. Thank you all for joining us here tonight for our AFS Parent Guardian webinar. We are so happy that you've joined us tonight, and we're really looking forward to speaking with you and providing a bit of context and hopefully some support before your children's departure with AFS. So hello and welcome to our AFS webinar. And we're happy to get started tonight. So first, we want to welcome you. We have families from across the US with children participating in programs departing from January through March with multiple destinations that include Ireland, Denmark, Argentina, Costa Rica, Colombia, Japan, France, and Italy. And we're excited for the diverse experiences and journeys ahead of everyone. I want to briefly note that we are recording tonight's webinar, so please feel free to turn your camera on or off, whatever feels most comfortable for you tonight. And if you could be cognizant of the mute button, we would appreciate that as well. So tonight we'll be covering a myriad of topics that include an introduction to the AFS support and learning team and an AFS and apologies, we actually don't have an AFS parent tonight who couldn't make it, unfortunately. But we'll also be chatting about what is immersion? What does it look like? What are some of the learning objectives? What is an experience like for you as, what is the experience like for a participant? How can you support them? We'll describe the AFS support system, and we'll also review a little bit of AFS's history so that you can understand a little bit about how we got here. So part of our goals tonight, and while we won't be speaking to country-specific elements or operations such as visa or travel, our goals for tonight do include an effort to speak about the emotional experience of being a parent or guardian of an AFS exchange student with you as the intended audience member. So as I mentioned, tonight won't cover logistics such as visas, timelines, and travel. We have previously conducted a webinar that did speak about that. We'll share how to access that if you didn't see it already. But we hope that by the end of tonight, we'll contextualize the AFS experience to support you as a family. We hope that we can empower you to anticipate both the highs and lows of an exchange experience. We want to illustrate the program realities and personalize AFS-USA's support and learning department. And then finally, we want to share tips and resources to prepare you for the experience as well. So a few tips tonight. This webinar will cover information that's general about the AFS programming and not country specific. At the end, we'll have a question and answers session. But if you have questions throughout, please feel free to either raise your hand or ask it in the chat. We'll make sure that we can incorporate it throughout tonight's time together. And then we'll make sure that we send a recording and slides out to all parents tomorrow for reference as well. So before we really begin, we want to extend a sincere kudos to you all for allowing your child to participate in something meaningful, very different, and very challenging too. We're enormous believers in the power of an exchange program, and the individuals you'll hear from tonight have all experienced this firsthand too. So we want to extend our gratitude to you for trusting us to support your son or daughter's experience and journey. In the chat, I would invite you to share the hopes you have for your AFS participant. What skills do you hope your child will gain or improve during the exchange? And what do you hope your child will get out of the experience? So please feel free to chat to each other as we proceed with tonight. So as we jump in, we want to make sure we give a quick introduction about who we are as an organization and share a quick snippet of our AFS history. So AFS began as a volunteer ambulance service in 1915, which attended to the wounded on both sides of the conflict. Through this act of volunteering and meeting individuals with different cultures, they came up with the idea of a way to prevent wars such as World War I from happening. And that was the concept of student exchange, supported by volunteers who believed in the mission of creating a more just and peaceful world. You can see one of our first Americans in Japan on an AFS program in 1951, and we actually have many family members who are sending a student to Japan with us tonight. But AFS has been welcomed by many by many U.S. presidents, and has been really a part of the history is something that is really felt by our volunteers and staff today. But today, the AFS mission continues to respond to the needs of an increasingly complex world, and we offer programs in more than 40 countries and host international students from more than 80 countries here in the United States. And true to the spirit of our founders, this life-changing intercultural learning programs are made possible by the dedicated work of AFS volunteers and host families. We have more than 2,600 volunteers in the US and over 50,000 volunteers worldwide. So the way that this translates into how our organization is structured is that our organization operates as a nonprofit and volunteer-based organization with both a local and international network that is really focused on the cultural and immersion style of experiences that we're able to offer. So that is a true, authentic, and hopefully peace-building experience. So the people who've been working with AFS so far have been those that you see on the screen, our Study Abroad team. I should mention my name is Parker Allen. I'm the senior manager of the Study Abroad team. And so one of our goals for tonight is to introduce you to the support and learning team who will be your point of contact once your students go on program. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it to the real stars of tonight, who are Jordan and John.
Thank you so much, Parker. So I'm Jordan Lucas. I'm one of the managers of the Participant Support and Learning team. I've been with AFS for a few years now, and prior to coming to AFS, I've lived abroad in a couple of different places and taught English and taught French here in the US. So coming from an educational background, I am one of 10, I believe there are 9 represented here, but I'm one of 10 on our team. We have a very new person that just started. We have two managers at the moment, Amanda and myself, senior Khadija, and then we have several participant support and learning specialists, which if you are interacting with us while your student is on program, likely your first point of contact will be one of our specialists. One of the specialists is also joining me tonight, which is John, who's going to help us present, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi all, my name is John Hamill and I am a participant support specialist with our support and learning department. I've been at AFS for just under 2 years now. I was an exchange student myself, although not with AFS, with a different organization through my high school, and I went to on exchange to Germany. I've also been in education for a number of years now. And was a Peace Corps volunteer in the country of Georgia. So a lot of fun experience living and interacting in other cultures, which again is kind of the topic of our conversations tonight.
Thanks, John. Yes, so many of our team members, most of our team members have had experience living abroad and do speak a variety of languages. So we have quite a little pool of knowledge. All right, so jumping right into it. So what is immersion? Your student will be going on an immersive program, and on the surface, that means they are going to be living with a host family, participating in the local community, and going to a local school, which is a very big part of their experience and that immersion experience, because they're going to be experiencing that in the local language and very much in the local culture. So our goal for the students in terms of immersion is really for them to fully engage in the culture, take advantage of being there, to gain, a very deep understanding of its values, customs, traditions, really starting to reflect on their own and how those might be different or complement each other. And really to begin to participate in daily activities the same way that locals do, interacting with locals in their community, and by the end of their program having a firm understanding of the way that others live. So it's meant to be a very authentic experience. So Parker, I'll let you. Thank you. All right, so some of the goals, just overarching that we have for students who are coming on an AFS program are personal transformation, interpersonal communication, which is so, so big, intercultural knowledge, and global awareness. So you see this kind of encompasses a lot of different aspects of the program. I mean, your student will be in situations that they've never experienced before. So it's really a ripe opportunity for learning, right? And to develop all of these things. Before they depart, AFS participants are given access to what's called student learning journey models, which is self-paced and it has a variety of different things, assignments, videos, things where learners can interact with AFS peers around the world and interact with content. And it's an opportunity for them to start to, reflect on the types of things they're going to be encountering and how they can learn from it. And what we also like to say is that students also develop what are AFS superpowers during their program, or that's the goal for them to develop these things, which are adaptability, critical thinking, self-awareness, open-mindedness, valuing difference, communication, which has already been noted, empathy, global awareness, and change making. So we really want students to come away having, a broader perspective of the world, themselves, and other people, and how they exist in the world and how that affects other people. I will pass it on to John to talk a little bit about what the experience looks like and that adjustment.
Thanks, Jordan. So kind of what we wanted to talk tonight about is how you as parents and guardians can help support your students, your child through some of the high points of their experience, as well as some of the anticipated low points. And this is a really good visualization of what that ebb and flow looks like, of the highs and the lows. So prior to coming on program, they might feel excitement and anticipation, even a little bit of anxiety when they're navigating their placement and finding out what their community is going to be, what city they're going to be living in, what their school is like. Upon arriving on program, they're going to be faced with potentially some discomfort, some culture shock, some very, very new experiences all coming at them at once. And that can be both, visual cultural differences, so the things that we see on the surface, as well as invisible cultural differences, the parts of our culture that are a little bit deeper down. We can see cultural differences from, of course, the visual might be, or in this case, auditory, the language, right? So that's a very kind of on the surface cultural difference. But there might be some deeper cultural differences as well, such as body language that you might not realize at first, that there are those differences that exist. So, when the student first arrives on program, this is all gonna be coming at them at once. And they might feel some anxiety, some discomfort. It takes time to adjust to that new cultural context and cultural environment. After a few days, weeks, a month, they might start to become familiar and comfortable in their community and feel at ease and feel like they're learning the language and have these really, really high points where they feel like they're learning, they feel like they're getting a lot out of this experience. They're making friends, they're participating in new activities, they're joining clubs, all of these, exciting brand new things that you would experience starting at a new school, and learning about a new cultural context. As you kind of get into that routine and it becomes your day to day, you might see another dip into one of those low points, which could be, being a little bit bored, finding things a little bit more mundane. The initial the initial excitement might have worn off, and you're feeling a little bit run down, and you're having to do things like homework, right? Or waking up early in the morning to go to class, because this is still an educational exchange, right? It's still an educational experience. And you might find yourself being, a student might find themselves being frustrated or even feeling a sense of isolation during this time as they dig deeper into those cultural differences and find their niche and their place in their new community. Um, Generally, as they do find that place, we see the experience kind of hit another one of those highs where they feel like, hey, I've really become a member of this community. I've got a friend group, a social network. I've got friends and family here, and they might experience that high on program of really feeling a sense of belonging and a sense of adaptation and integration into their community. And of course, all good things must come to an end. Eventually, they're going to reach the point where they're going to have to start thinking about their return to the United States. And for some students, that feeling might come sooner than they might anticipate. And that's another one of those, very, very normal experiences, ups and downs of a program such as this, is the anticipation and the anxiety of returning home. And I can tell you from experience, sometimes that culture shock or even anticipation or anxiety around culture shock, returning to a culture that you're familiar with can be more challenging than the initial culture shock of entering a new culture. So again, this visualization is a really good way to look at those ups and downs of a program. And we do anticipate low points, right? These types of programs come with challenges. They come with adversity. And of course, our students, will always have the help and the guidance of their local support volunteers and of support staff to help them get through those challenges and those adversities. So the next slide. Oh, yeah, this is another good visualization of what the cultural adjustment cycle looks like. So you can see, arrival, fatigue, homesickness, settling in, and this all culminates again with, when your program is drawing to a close, readjustment, and kind of closing the loop of that circle. Next slide. Again, another visualization. These programs, they come with their ups and downs, and that is absolutely to be expected. So this is another good visualization of what that cultural adjustment process looks like.
Alrighty, thanks, John. It's kind of given us an overview of, what to expect. And I think sometimes, people see this and, oh yeah, normal. Yeah, of course, there's going to be an adjustment, but it doesn't always sink in until you're in it or until your student is in it of what does that actually look like or feel like, right? Because you can hear it intellectually and understand it and not know what that feels like. So I think as we keep going, we're going to go through some layers of what that might look like for your student. So talking about some of the high points, what can you do as a parent to support your student during these? I think, like celebrating that accomplishment, even if it's, it might be ordering a coffee in the cafe, in the local cafe, the first time that they're able to do that in the local language, or the first time that they're able to respond to a host parent's question in the language, going to school, making a friend, those types of things, those are accomplishments, and ones that we don't always think of, in the US, in our own culture, in our own context. So picking those out and really helping the students recognize those are going to be very important as you're communicating with them on program. I think some other things you can do, as it has on this slide, are encouraging them to reflect, to journal, and to think about when something maybe confused them, to think about, well, what worked and what didn't work, what did I do and I didn't get what I wanted from it, and how could I perhaps do that differently, the next time. Um, Gratitude is huge. That is something definitely we see with our hosted students all the time. It's definitely an American value, to be sure. We see our host families in the US all the time as saying, like, oh, this must be a cultural difference, expressing gratitude. And so we do want to make sure that even though students may not be used to doing this at home with you all as you as their family, that they're thinking about it on a more specific level of thanking their host family for, when they're making them food for the first time, when they're taking them out to do things, maybe introducing them to friends, just making sure that that's verbally communicated as well. Because I think sometimes in the ways that we interpret, someone being grateful or thankful in our context is not always the same way. So we want to make sure that that's really getting across. Um, yes, I've already kind of mentioned small victories and how overseas things can be simple. But I think also just one of the big things that you all can do is encouraging that reflection and challenging them to learn from a situation that might be confusing them, and to seek out what resources they can use locally that will help them figure those out. So moving on a little bit to the low points, which is, where sometimes our team unfortunately comes in a little more, right? One of the reasons for our team, why we exist, is to help students through some of the more difficult points of living abroad. And I think one thing that will be really good for you all as parents is to reflect on, how are you also going to approach when your student is having a low point? Because there are things that you can do as it's written on the slide, but there's also, you might also need to reflect for yourself, like, how do I handle that when my student is in the US, and how may that look different abroad? How is that going to have to look different abroad? Because you're not going to be able to support them in the same way because you're very far away, right? And they're going to have to rely on those local people to help them, whether that's their volunteers, their host family, or local AFS staff. So, definitely you are there to provide that moral support and encourage them, like I said, to lean on the local network of support that they have. Listen, hearing where they are. And also, I think knowing that, whatever they may be expressing, um, is completely valid, and it may also just be a part of that dip, like John was talking about in the adjustment cycle. I know one time when I was living abroad for a year, for example, I was probably going through a low point or struggling with some interpersonal communication, and mentioned it to my parents in passing while we were on the phone. And I remember coming back to the US and my parents just still being worried about this one phone call, that we had, and I couldn't even remember what I had told them or what I was upset about at the time. It had passed. So it was a lot of times when you're far away from your kid, what we see, especially in our team, is that things become bigger deals, right? So I think it's, taking that into consideration, also listening and, affirming that that's okay if they're going through a low point, and seeing what they can do, again, to rely on those sources locally, which we'll continue to talk about and name in a little bit, to help them feel better. But definitely, if they have some of these coping strategies under their belt and you all sit and talk about them and come up with them before they leave, it's just going to be all the more helpful. And by coping strategies,
Really good.
I'm talking about journaling, for example, how they take care of themselves. Sometimes they don't even, they do have those coping strategies here in the US, but aren't always able to name them. So maybe sitting down to really help them name those before they come abroad would be very helpful. Also, I can't stress enough these sample questions over here on the right. When you're having a conversation with a student, with your student, when they're at a low point, these are all really helpful questions that you can go ahead and ask them. And I will say, when it gets to a point where you might need to call one of us on staff just to talk through a situation, these are things we're also going to ask. If it's that the student might be having a little bit of an issue with school or their host family or something, one of the first things any of our specialists are going to ask are, has the student talked to their local contact, their local volunteer about it? So these are things I would encourage you to go ahead and note, take a picture of, whatever, so that you're ready and have the questions under your belt when it comes time to help the student work through something. Alrighty, so moving right along here and thinking about what could be some of the issues, when a student goes on program. And I would say what couldn't be an issue, because I think there could be there are still a variety of things that I encounter on a day-to-day basis that I never thought could possibly, happen. Basically, they're taking up a life in another place, right? And in this other place, people communicate differently, they think differently, they behave differently. They're, so many differences that are both surface level and very much under the surface. So some examples of this are just as simple as, how do I express my opinion? How do I express, a feeling about something? A lot of times American students, for example, want to express that directly. And in the host culture, and I'm thinking, Japan as an example, they're not a direct culture. They're a very indirect culture. So that may not be a way that is effective. The student might have to try a couple of different ways to express themselves that is perhaps outside of their comfort zone before they're successful. And they may also have to ask their local volunteer, what is the best way for me to communicate this with my host family? This is what I want to say. I want to be respectful. How do I say that? And I've had a lot of conversations with our colleagues in Japan and with different students who've been in Japan and in other countries, of trying to really figure out how to best navigate that in a way that culturally makes sense for the cultural communication in that context. And if you're looking at this diagram on the other side, sorry, Parker, you unmuted. Did you want to say something? Oh, okay. If you're looking at this diagram on the other side, and we're talking about dealing with a conflict, dealing with an issue, I think it's also important to note that, just like people communicate differently, indirectly, directly, that goes for interpersonal conflicts as well. Sometimes they're going to happen in a really direct context, and sometimes people are going to go around and express themselves differently or try to approach the problem in a different way, which really means that the student is going to have to be open to different approaches, and what they may be used to in your family or just in our cultural context here in the US, just it may not work. And it may be confusing for a bit too, but that is why, there's a whole nother team in each of these countries that is our team, the support team. So we have that team on staff, they have support volunteers that will be there to support the student, and they are really those best sources of information to help navigate all of these differences in culture that your student will experience.
And just to add, something that comes to mind is that the no student will arrive on program with knowing how to navigate these styles of communication So they'll be learning a new language, which is very literal, but at the same time, they'll be learning a new communication style. And so what John had shared at the beginning with our, particularly the stress adaptation model, That is making, mistakes every single day, but learning from them. So particularly when they're at a low because they made a mistake, for example, that's why they're on the program, is to learn from those mistakes, because that is kind of one of the purposes of an immersion program. There's no way that they'll be able to flawlessly navigate a new culture. But by learning from their experiences, that's how they will really become authentic locals. So, kind of to tie it back to how you can support them at both the highs and lows is say, hey, mistakes happen. That's perfect. What can you learn from it? So that's what I also wanted to kind of add.
No, thank you, Parker. And, just jumping off of that, we don't expect students to know all of this, but it is just so, I can't stress enough that it's helpful if you all as parents and as students, well, everybody really in the situation goes into it with an open mind of maybe the way I'm thinking about it is from my cultural lens, and that perhaps if I'm in a situation where I'm not being understood, perhaps the other person is coming at it from a different cultural lens. So that's really all that I want to stress, is that just being open to the fact that other people may come from a completely different context, and that our goal, especially our team, is to help everyone meet in the middle somewhere and be understood and learn from all of those, cultural faux pas or not. I hesitate even to use the word mistake, because I've talked to students many times where I've said, what you did would be perfectly fine in your own cultural context. That is a perfect way to, approach an issue. It just didn't work in Japan. So now we have to learn from it and figure out how to do it in Japan. And again, like Parker said, there's no way they can know all of those things before program, but it's helpful if they're just open to it. I will pass it back to you, John. Or is it still me? Sorry, I think it's still me. All right. So some of these common on-program concerns that we see, and this is across the board in many different countries and with our students that we host in the US, are, students living with a different family. That's not only a language, change, a culture change, but it's also a family dynamic change that they might not even be thinking of. I know if, many students just went and lived with a different family in the US, it would be a big adjustment, right? Because they're just adjusting to a new family and how families live together. So having some interpersonal conflict within the host family is quite normal, right? And this is part of the whole experience, is learning how to navigate that in a productive way. Um, so it's very common, and volunteers, expect that. Staff in the local country and on our team all expect that and are well equipped and experienced to, help navigate that. Homesickness is also common, especially around holidays. I think John mentioned this as well. Students tend to get homesick, and where we, as we troubleshoot, with you or with, the host country, how to help the student. Some common things that we might suggest might be, it might sound a little counterintuitive. Like, for example, we often suggest students decrease actually their communication with home when they are feeling homesick, just so that they can really focus their time on program, and really live in the culture rather than living in two places. So that's one example, and also it's okay to validate when students are feeling homesick, that's okay, and oftentimes it will pass. And focusing on some things that they can do on program, ways that they can spend their time, is also usually very helpful. Sometimes in different countries, the academic calendar is quite different, and students have time in between different semesters or trimesters when they might have a few weeks when they're not in school. This is not necessarily a giant on-program concern, but I would say it is a good opportunity for the student when they, know that might be coming up, to be proactive and find themselves some ways to be engaged in the local community quality while they're there, rather than, it coming Monday and they don't have school for a few weeks, and then, going, I don't know what I'm just going to stay at home with my host family. And then, after a week, that kind of gets like, well, that's kind of gets a little old. So these are all of these things are ways, things that you can expect, but also there are some ways to be proactive about approaching them, since you can expect them. Students may have challenges with school, with friendships. Making friends is one of the hardest things in a different culture, I will say. That is something we talk to students about all the time. And I have students come and, they're used to having a circle of 20 friends at home, and they've grown up with all of these friends, and then they come on program and they've got to start fresh, right? So I always say, look, if you make one or two very good friends that you get out of this program, like, that's a win. Like, that's a big accomplishment, right? Especially when those are friends that they might have for their whole lives. Like, that could be the most important thing that they get out of their program, or a couple of lifelong relationships. So I think it's less about quantity when it comes to that, and definitely more about quality and investing in some of those friendships. Um, Rule breaking behavior. What can I say? Teenagers are teenagers. They will push boundaries and break rules sometimes. And that is one of the things we do have to address on program occasionally. And network wide, meaning the AFS offices in different countries within our AFS network, we have some common support tools that we use to address some behavioral concerns, which oftentimes might look like, this isn't necessarily if a student's having a behavioral concern, but perhaps if there's just some communication issues in the host family, but it might just look like writing things down so that there's a common understanding between all parties of what the expectations are. Expectation is such a big word, and it's such a challenge, right? Because kids come on program going with all kinds of expectations. And I would say most of the time, what they experience in their country is vastly different from whatever their expectations were. And oftentimes in good, very good ways, and ways that they did not even fathom could exist. But anyway, getting back to how we deal with rule breaking behavior. So we also have some additional support tools where it may look like more of a behavioral contract. We don't use that word behavioral contract, but that's sort of what it may look like once we get to a more escalated concern. Additionally, medical concerns. Students will have, not all of the students obviously will have medical concerns, but again, they are teenagers and things happen unexpectedly. They play sports they've never played before, and they may hurt themselves, or they may be in a climate they're not used to, and have any variety of bodily concerns related to the climate. So those do come up, and that is handled by our support team. So we do have experience and knowledge in navigating those, and obviously we would be in communication with you all as parents for any very significant medical concerns.
And just to maybe add a couple items that just came to mind too, because
Go
I've
ahead,
experienced
Parker.
all of these things. I was an exchange student in Portugal, and I also lived in South Korea. But in terms of extreme homesickness, I think that's applicable to everyone who's spent time abroad. Jordan had mentioned just kind of like, limiting communication and things like that. But I'd also like provide kind of a framework that worked for me, which was just focusing on the quality of my communication. So for me, it helped when when I focused on the frequency. So text messages, instant communications, those can be really challenging to bring you out of the moment. But when I was abroad, the way that I communicated with my family is I wrote really long emails. And it was almost a moment for me to journal out loud and bring my family along with the experience. And I wouldn't send them that often, But now looking back, those are really important communications that I had. So as opposed to communicating more with my family, I communicated a higher quality to my family. And so, as opposed to, I also had to tell them, as opposed to, Zooming, or back then it was Skyping at best. It would be like we would Skype like once every 2 weeks, things like that, or once a month, as opposed to like, hey, every day sort of thing. So that would just be something that worked for me, is figuring out what works for your family, with a priority being what is the quality of my communication. Because the instantaneous short form can really lead to, I think, things that you had mentioned, Jordan, being like, I don't remember saying that. That wasn't a big deal to me. But it was just kind of, if your child says, I had a really bad day today, you'll interpret it really differently without the context. It could have been that they were late to class, and they were bummed out about it, as opposed to having something that's much more grand of a bad day. It's hard to find that context. And then also challenges with schools and friendships. I totally agree with what Jordan was saying. And I tie that back also to kind of the prioritization, and valuing those small victories. So I think many AFSers will come in with really high expectations. Will say, in 3 weeks, I want a giant friend group, and it's going to look the same way as my US friend group, but in Colombia or in Costa Rica. And that will be a cultural learning experience that many students, many typical teenagers, they might not be as scheduled as a typical American teenager. And the ways that people hang out might be culturally different than the ways that typical American teenagers hang out. So if you can just have one friend, or that is um, it is so worthy of celebration. So just to flip that on ways that you can kind of celebrate your AFSer while they're abroad, while they experience some of these things. And my last thing, and I'll stop talking. Sometimes with
No,
school
sure.
breaks, because we place our students in local schools throughout the country, each school is going to have a slightly different academic calendar. So there may be some times where there are school breaks and things like that. We really recommend that students take initiative to really make something memorable. So for example, I've worked with alumni that made a cookbook, and they used the opportunity when they had tons of time to learn all of their host families' recipes and say, hey, I really loved this meal. I don't know what it was called. Can you show me how to make it? And they came home with a cookbook that took about 2 weeks to make. But because they had a purpose and a project, it gave them an opportunity, as opposed to like, I'm just going to twiddle my thumbs, which is a really tall ask for an adult, and especially a teenager. But that would be an example of how you might support them during those lows of like, I don't know what to do. Like, you maybe have some brainstorm about what you might call like a capstone or something like that. What interests you? What do you want to learn about? Spend some time about, and use this time. So those are the couple things that came to mind that I wanted to share.
Well, and also just, one thing that comes to mind too, a lot of our hosted students in the US put together presentations about their home country for their schools. And that can be something too on some of those downtimes that if they do have the time and their school is interested. I know that in Japan, that is something that schools are interested in. So that is something that students could also, spend their time really delving into. But yes, thank you, Parker. Those are all very, very excellent ideas and feedback. And John, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, y'all. So what can you expect from AFS while your student is abroad? First, sometimes no news is good news. If you're hearing from us, it means that your student is working on if you're not hearing from us, it means your student is working on their adjustment. Of course, there's still going to be ups and downs. Just because you're not hearing from us directly does not mean that your student didn't have a bad day or isn't finding a certain aspect of their program difficult or challenging. But it generally we would be getting in touch with you for a few reasons. Those include like volunteer and host family issues. We do see that is a big area of adjustment for some of our students. And it's important to keep in mind, our students aren't just getting used to a new cultural context, as in the culture of the country, but they're also getting used to a new family culture, a new way, the families do things differently, even in uh, communities of the same culture. And sometimes what a student's expectation of their family is might not match the reality. So, you might hear from us due to conflict or challenges in the host family home. You might hear from us regarding orientations, school updates, host family composition, different communication styles, how the student is developing their social circle, their group of friends. We have medical insurance here listed. It does happen. Students can become ill or have an accident on program. So you might hear from us regarding insurance or if the student needs to go to the hospital. A note on that, that is something that also looks different culture to culture, right? Whereas in some cultures, there might be a very high threshold to visit the hospital or to go to the doctor. In other cultures, there's a very low threshold. So you might see a host family take the student to the doctor because they have a slight cold or they're coughing or, they have a sore throat. And those might not, in the American cultural context, those might not meet the threshold of a doctor's visit, but in some other cultures, they might. So again, there's those cultural differences. But again, sometimes no news is good news. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything is perfect and all of their expectations are meeting. We still anticipate there to be those challenges, those adversities, but it means that they're handling those challenges and they're working with their local community to overcome those challenges and to integrate into their communities and become community members. Also, you might hear from us regarding if you would like to visit your student. Generally, visits are discouraged while a student is on program. Again, this is to allow the student that ability to really focus on their program, focus on their integration into their community, and become a real community member. And we find that sometimes visits, especially visits earlier on or in the first half of a program, can be quite distracting to that ongoing adjustment and ongoing integration. But yeah, so these are some of the reasons that we might be in communication over the course of the year or over the course of the semester. We also recognize that this is a new experience for most, if not all of you as well. Having your son or daughter abroad on an exchange, especially an exchange that, is a semester or a year long. Just like your child might feel homesick, you might feel a sense of sickness too, with them out of the home and, so far from home. And that is absolutely natural, completely understandable, and it's part of this adjustment process. Um, so some ways that you can help support your students' AFS experience and support their study abroad experience. As Parker mentioned, a great way to support your child is to get involved yourself in learning about the culture in which they're living. Maybe try to cook a dish from the country in which they live. Learn about the culture. Talk to ask your student what they think or what they've learned about their new culture. Ask them questions and just be eager to learn about their experience in this new cultural context in which they're living. It's a great way to support their experience. Recognizing growth, and it doesn't happen overnight. This is, again, adjustment is a long process. It takes time and it's full of ups and downs. And sometimes it's really helpful just to acknowledge the small accomplishments. Um, if they learned a new phrase or sentence, or they were, I can't remember if it was Parker or Jordan mentioned, like that first time going to a store or a restaurant and being able to order for yourself. These are kind of the small experiences that we can recognize and really encourage when we meet those milestones and have those accomplishments. Also mentioned before, limiting communication. And, of course, we're not saying completely cut off all communication and don't talk to your child, but, they're working to adjust and integrate into a new community. And sometimes too much communication with home can be a bit of a distraction to that. It's hard to feel, um, pulled in two different directions or feel like you're living in two places at once. And oftentimes, a lot of communication with home, whether it be with friends or family, can lead the student to kind of feel like they're missing out on things back in the United States when there's so much for them, so much new for them to explore and experience in their new communities. So limiting or finding ways to limit that communication and to keep that communication productive and supportive is such a massive way in which you as parents or guardians can support your students' experience. Um, crisis will probably happen. And this can be a small crisis. This could be, again, the student got sick and had to go to the hospital, or used used the wrong word in a sentence and had a faux pas and maybe embarrassed themselves, or is really having a lot of disagreements with their host family, and they're just not communicating uh, productively, and maybe there's some cultural aspects to that as well, as there often are. But sometimes even small challenges like that can feel like a crisis. They can feel, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening. This is horrible. When you're in a new cultural context and and you are learning and you are making those mistakes, um, these things do happen and they're anticipated, right? We expect them to happen, but it doesn't make them any less challenging to go through. They're still challenges, and they're still, um, they're difficult. And supporting your child through that, uh by encouraging them and letting them know, look, this is part of the learning process. This is part of adjusting to a new culture, to a new community. It can um really help them in kind of seeing the bigger picture, seeing that, okay, I had a small challenge or a small hurdle, but I have an entire year on this program. I'm going to overcome this. I'm going to really work hard to work on this adjustment, or work on my language skills, or work on my interpersonal relationships with friends and neighbors or family members in this new community. Um, Part of that is encouraging your student to utilize their support network. We have all of these incredible, oftentimes, decades long serving volunteers in these communities who have a lot of experience in helping students through these challenges and helping students navigate that cross-cultural communication. And they really are the best resource um, for a student to have when they are experiencing challenges in their community, because these are community members, right? They're locals. They're people who are already members of this community. They're friends and neighbors, and they're also, as I mentioned, oftentimes very experienced and used to helping students navigate these challenges. Um, so as I think Jordan mentioned, if we're ever speaking or you're ever talking to us here in the support staff, one of our first questions might be, has the student talked to their volunteer about this? Have they had a conversation about the challenges they're having with someone local who can help them navigate those challenges? Um, they're, of course, adjusting to new cultural context. Their experience is going to be different. It is not going to look like their lives here in the United States. Um, that doesn't mean it's better or it's worse. It's different. It's going to be things on the surface level, as we talked about before, things like food, language, but it's also going to be those things that we don't see on the surface level, those things that are those deeper parts of culture that Jordan was talking about, such as how do we navigate communication? How do we address challenges? How do we, even like subtle things like body language. Those are going to be different, and in some cases very different to what the student is used to and what their experiences have been here in the United States. And that is all perfectly normal and again expected and anticipated. And when your student experiences those differences, um, part of supporting the student is just coaching them, look, this might be frustrating, this might be difficult, but these challenges or these differences aren't bad. They're not negative. They're just something new. There's something new to experience. Um, Also on your end, you can anticipate probably seeing some changes and some personal development in your child when they over the course of the year and when they return home. We often see students develop um, of course, many of our students are already very um, extroverted and they are not all, but they might be very independent, or maybe they're not independent, but we tend to see on program students kind of find themselves and discover new things about themselves through this experience of learning a new culture. And that's to be expected, right? They're teenagers and they're figuring themselves out, and part of being on a program such as this and being in a new cultural context, it can teach you things about yourself that you might not have already known. And that is again something that is most likely will happen over the course of this year.
And I just want to quickly note one thing about the experience overseas is not better or worse, it's just different. Because I think about my own time when I was in Portugal, and I kind of cringe in the way that I described, like, my experience back home. It was like, everyone back home is so uptight and isn't focused on living in the moment. Like everywhere, everything in Portugal is perfect. I love it here. So if you could experience or hear things that feel like, your hometown or everything you've given your child and your upbringing is being dissed or compared to. I assure you, it is a really long circle. So I would just give the recommendation to start to grow a thicker skin, because it will be something that they'll come back to you in 10 years and say, you know what, there was some more nuance here. So if you feel like you're being criticized, don't take it personally. It's just kind of a euphoric experience that many of our students have. And then on the same way, they could say, everything stinks here and home is so much better. It will oscillate throughout that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Parker. All right, I think oh, no, this is still me. So this is another handy diagram of our support structure. So you as the parent or the guardian, your direct point of contact with AFS as an organization will be our participant support staff. So folks like me. And in fact, if we have anybody from kind of the Northeast, New England, New York, Pennsylvania, I will be your support staff. So it's great to meet you all. But in terms of the way that our support is structured, we here in the support and learning department will be your direct line of communication to your student's program. Now, this isn't to say you can't communicate with your child except through us. Of course, that's not the case. Although we do encourage you to in some ways limit that communication. But for example, if you have any concerns about their school situation or their host family situation, or, you know, or do they want to go travel on a weekend that they have off of school? Or, you know, oh, I heard that she's been out of school, or he or she's been out of school for a day or two with the flu. We would be your point of communication then to get in touch with our partners overseas, and our AFS partners within our AFS network, who are in communication with, again, that local community, those local volunteers who are helping to support your child and our students. So you can see from the handy visualization here. It would The way it works is you would reach out to us here in the support staff. We would then contact our partner overseas, who would get in touch with the local support. And then on the other end of that is the student and the host family and the community. So I know it seems like a game of telephone. It seems long, but there's a very good reason why we have it structured this way. And that is because we are communicating across cultures, right? You know, the communicating directly with a host family, not only might there be, which we discourage communicating directly with the host family in most cases, but not only is there a language barrier in some cases, but there's also cultural nuances, and there's different ways that we communicate and different ways that we address challenging situations. Um, and even us here in support, although, as Jordan mentioned, a lot of us do have that experience overseas, we're not experts on every single cultural context. I've never been to Japan. I don't know what it's like to live there or to experience that culture firsthand. So the reason we have this set up in this way is so that, when you reach out to us with a concern, we are discussing it with our partners and with through them, that local community, to make sure that we're addressing things in a culturally nuanced and culturally appropriate way, and to get their feedback and to get their understanding of that culture and that community. Um, so when your student does, again, face some of these anticipated challenges while on program, please do not be a stranger. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And of course, again, we would be then communicating with our partners overseas to address those challenges in a culturally appropriate way.
And sorry for keep jumping in, but one note about like your local contact person, often referred to as a liaison or local volunteer. I find that the best way to think about them is kind of a cultural informant. They aren't there to directly fix a problem per se, but they are there to provide coaching for your son or daughter to help them fix the problem. So, for example, it'd be a great they're people that you can bounce an idea off of saying, I have this challenge with my host family. Is this normal in Colombian culture? Or is this unique to this host family? How might I navigate this challenge I have? What is normal here? And so I find that these like the local staff are really good at just providing them with the local knowledge about how a person of that culture will navigate that specific conflict. But they would not be the person to then go sit down with the host family and say, you better do it this way because Parker wasn't happy. That could be an example. But that is, I think, a mindset to have is just like these are coaches for them that are on their team that want to help them succeed, but they will ask for your students' buy-in in order to do that. But that's just like one example. Of course, there's other administrative things that they will directly help with, but that's how I like to think about it, at least for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And on our end, we also, in a way, serve that purpose. If there's something that your son or daughter has reported to you that you find concerning or culturally confusing, we're happy to help have that communication with our partners overseas to discuss, is this normal in this cultural context? Is this not normal? And have those conversations with you about what you can expect from your son or daughter's experience abroad.
And if I could just add before we wrap up, Parker, a couple of just drops of wisdom, I guess, maybe collective wisdom from our team of what the types of things we encounter a lot. I would say some things that we would leave you with are it's going to be very important, to assume good intentions. When there is something that you don't understand, that's going to be a really important mindset to hold on to, is not jumping to someone means my child wrong, because we do want to give people the benefit of the doubt and assume that perhaps there is something at play that we're not quite aware of yet. And that's what our job is try to figure out what that is, right? And to try to navigate that issue for you. I would say one thing we run into a lot, and that I think is really important to keep in mind, is that a lot of times, especially when your child first arrives in country, someone's going to be speaking English to them, and English is likely not that person's first language. It is probably not, it might not even be their second language or third language. They might speak a lot of languages. So they aren't necessarily going to speak English in a US context, right? There might be words that they use that we wouldn't normally use and that might sound stronger or come off a little bit more assertive than we would, because we as our first language would know how to navigate that in the most polite way possible. So that's one thing we try to emphasize a lot, is like when you're assuming those good intentions, also assume that perhaps that word or phrase, turn of phrase that the person used that kind of sounded a little off maybe wasn't what they intended to say. I would say another, piece of wisdom from our team is please speak up sooner rather than later. We know that American students, especially among the network, are very independent. They want to handle problems by themselves. And oftentimes parents are very proud that their student wants to handle those problems by themselves, and as are we. But we also want to make sure that we're involved in anything that might be taking place, because what I would hate to happen is for us to get to a point where your student feels like they've tried everything and you feel like you've tried everything, and we're just entering into this scenario here and starting to ask all the questions and gather the information, and everybody's kind of tired, right? So we want to be there early on with you so that we can really go through it with you and save some of that I tried everything and nothing worked like process. And I would say, just lastly, I jotted some notes for myself while John was talking. I would say, lastly, just expect that and push them to be out of their comfort zone. We never want a student to be to the point where they're panicking, but we do want students to be out of their comfort zone, because that's where they learn. That's where they learn the most, is when they try something new and when they try communicating in a new way. So I think that's perhaps one of the biggest things you can also take away. And then lastly, I just wanted to say, with regards to this chain of communication that's here, we're also not saying you can never speak to the host family. We just don't recommend that you approach a major issue directly with the host family. Our recommendation is that we are your main point of contact as AFS-USA, and that host family's main point of contact is AFS Japan or AFS Paraguay, or wherever your student is studying. And in that way, we can make sure that we are approaching an issue in a very culturally informed way, and linguistically, that there's nothing being lost in translation either. So with that, Parker, I'll hand it back to you to wrap us up.
Great. So just to be really simple, like this is how you contact the Participant Support and Learning department, that Jordan and John have represented tonight. You can email them. This email will go to all of the staff members, and the person assigned to your son or daughter will respond to that. You can also call the department 9 to 6 p.m. Eastern. That will ring and connect you with the right individual. And then also what we shared on the last screen was our 24/7, 365 duty officer, which is for on-program emergencies. So this is a number that's available to you whenever AFS is closed, at any time of the day. And I want to also flag this as that we've shared the chain of communication, but if you feel that your son or daughter's safety and well-being is questioned, um, they can go to anyone on that chain of communication, and we want you to call us as soon as you feel like that may be the case. It is a huge, huge priority for us. So, as Jordan was just mentioning, it is far better to over communicate when you think that something is small and simmering, as opposed to, okay, this has blown over and it's going to be much harder to solve. So, I invite you, please, to see our participant support and learning team as teammates with you to support your family's journey on here. And this is how you can contact them. This will be communicated via email, so no need to write this down. About a week before departure, you'll get another email that will list that. So I'm sure you also have many questions before you depart. And so I just want to make sure that if you have any questions before your family's departure, you can contact us in these ways. If you have a visa question, or if you have a travel question, finance question, these are the people these are the contact information that you can work with. But all of you should be working with a AFS Study Abroad specialist as well, and so they can direct you to any need that you might have. And finally, the link on the screen that I'll paste in the chat. This is a guidebook for all things for you. So ways that you might prepare for your experience is to make sure that you're clicking and answering the questions. It's designed in a searchable manner, so you can figure out, all right, I have a question before program, after program, on program, and it will put it up into different genres. And finally, this is a webinar designed specifically for parents, but we have 7 webinars for this. We very much encourage all the students to attend. Families are invited to all of these. It is not student specific, so please feel free to join all of these webinars. We're here in the process, so we definitely invite you as a way to make sure that you feel like you know what's going on and are hearing the same instructions that your son or daughters are receiving. This is kind of the ways in which the ways that we attempt to prepare you for that, which we recognize we cannot do in just over an hour. So I recognize that tonight was too much information, and it was certainly not enough information, but we wanted to make sure that we touched on things that we really valued, and that we've heard from parents and alumni that we did our best. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable with our support network here at AFS, and I hope that you feel like you know a little bit more about the experience. And now is the time of the night where we would love to invite your questions. So feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to say your question, or just include it in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them. So please feel free to ask any question that you have.
And there are already some in the chat. I see there's one about, how do most people send kids with a cell phone? Do you wait until they're in country or buy a phone there? I think that's a great question. I have a response, but Parker, perhaps you can lead and I can add based on what you all generally advise parents.
Yeah, I would generally advise that you speak with your cell phone provider, specifically about the country that you're going to, and specifically about your device's SIM card receptivity. So most students will get a SIM card in country. Many iPhones can accept them, but some cannot. So our students will typically get a cell phone in country if they cannot have if their US cell phone cannot accept a local SIM card. You'll your student will want to make sure they're on the right network. So sometimes, like if you're on Verizon, for example, Verizon might not have any coverage overseas. So I would speak with your specific cell phone provider, but I do recommend that they travel with a cell phone. And even if they don't have any cellular plan, many of our students use just the Wi-Fi to communicate via WhatsApp, or kind of Wi-Fi based messaging services. Jordan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and this is also from personal experience, international plans are quite expensive. So if you're looking for a cost-effective way, I think what most students do are they either take their cell phone, and then when they get in country, they just buy a local SIM card that gives them a local phone number. Or they keep their phone, turn off, put it in airplane mode so that you're not using the data or the service. You may suspend the service for the time that they're gone. I don't know. And they may just buy like a very cheap local phone. I think there is a great advantage to having a local phone number, because they are going to need to be in contact with their host family. They're going to need to be in contact with their local volunteers. And if you have a foreign phone number, sometimes that is going to cost people money to get in contact. So I would say it is best if they can find a way, either that they buy a SIM card to pop in their phone when they get there, or they just get a, very inexpensive local phone, that might not be a smartphone when they get there. And then they can use their American phone, on Wi-Fi, just still to communicate with you. Hopefully that answers that question, but I do think most volunteers and whatever country you're in prefer that students have a local phone number.
Can I add something here? So I spoke with AT&T, who is our carrier here in Maine, about this, and we plan to do the SIM card route because they said it's what, $10 or $12 a day if I leave the country. But pretty soon AT&T will shut that off and force you to get a phone number or a SIM card in the other country because they're going to lose money hand over fist.
Yeah, there you go. And I would just say, like Parker said, sometimes, so I know I don't want to speak, I'm not a cell phone expert, but I know that sometimes American phones that are bought in America do not work, particularly in some Asian countries, because they're on like separate networks. So it might not work to pop in a SIM card in another country. It kind of depends on the country. So that will have to be some research that you do to see if your US phone would take a Japanese SIM card, for example. And if not, they can always buy, an inexpensive phone to get a local number too. But safety-wise, I do think it's important that they're easily able to contact their local volunteers and host families, and that vice versa, they can contact them.
We have one question that says, like, if our kids are assigned to host families that live near each other, are they allowed to get together, in Japan? Or I think that's also applicable to our South American or Ireland or other countries too. That's a great question. And I would say that it will depend on their host family. Each host family is going to have different rules. And so they will be kind of the priority for each AFSer. So it's really important to make sure that the host family does not feel like they are a hotel, but more so that they are living as a member of the host family it's themselves. So there is a balance here. And as you mentioned, like making mistakes, like I didn't know my host family said it was okay for me to go see my friends, but they actually gave me indirect clues that informed me that, hey, I actually would love if you staying around for our uncle's barbecue. And so I would say to set the expectation, I would recommend against it. But of course, that's also part of the fun of the program. Your students will not just be making friends with Americans abroad, but there will be other students from around the AFS network in their country. So they may have they might not have any American friends close by, but they may have a friend from Germany or a friend from India that's an AFSer. So we find that is actually some of the coolest friendships that develop is like kind of the international friendships overseas. So just to set the expectation, I would say prioritize the host family relationship. And then, you have your built-in friends, hopefully. I should also make sure that I honestly communicate. Some students will not have other AFS students close by. So they might see them during their orientations or during different trips. And so it is not necessarily something that is guaranteed. It's something to prepare for, that they might not have another exchange student that is living in that same community. But they will have their host school community, their volunteers to help them make friends in their local environment. So I hope I provided a very gray yes and no. Also,
Yeah,
Dorothy provides a great tip after speaking with Verizon. So thank you for providing that.
yep. Thank you, Dorothy.
Right.
Are there any additional questions maybe that people didn't put in the chat, or I want to make sure we didn't miss anything in the chat? I don't think so.
I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I put it in the chat, which was I think I missed module 2. And it looked interesting to me, and I'm wondering where I can find it, because I assume these are all recorded. So is there a way that I can go back and watch module 2?
Yeah, we'll make sure that we send a recording out to you all. If we have that is our intention, to send the recordings of these webinars if you can't make it to you, if you can't make it live.
Oh,
So
okay.
we'll,
So it should
yeah.
be in my email.
Yes, and I
Okay.
recognize that something we haven't been able to fix as to how to send less emails, but we just have so much information. We're
I
trying.
appreciate it. I appreciate it all. I
Yeah,
have a folder for all my AFS emails, so I'll look through
smart.
there. Thank you.
Great. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, I am so thankful. I think we are so thankful for your time tonight. We hope you found it a little bit valuable. As I mentioned, I'm sure this was not enough information. But if you do have other points or questions that, sorry, I'm trying to bring our contact information back on the screen. Um,
There we
if
go.
you have any other questions that you think of, please feel free to contact us at Study Abroad. If you've been working with your Study Abroad specialist, I would recommend to start with them. But if you email studyabroad@afsusa.org, we'll make sure you get to the right place. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a good evening. We will be in touch in the upcoming months, and we're really thankful for that you're trusting AFS with your family's experience. So thank you so much, and I hope you have good evenings.
Absolutely. Very excited for your kids to start their journeys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Night all.